Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you an extraordinary and impactful story that will move your soul. Let's meet Ezekiel Montgomery, a traditional rabbi who faced a near-death experience and saw his life completely transformed when he encountered Jesus. What he experienced from this mystical encounter will surprise you and make you rethink everything you ever believed. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Get ready to embark on this intense and exciting journey towards the light of redemption. I got up early, smelling the comforting aroma of the coffee my wife had prepared in the kitchen, as the golden light of dawn invaded our home. The silence of the morning was punctuated only by the soft murmur of the city that was waking up, and at that moment, every detail seemed to carry an omen that I, even immersed in my convictions, could not decipher. As I mentally reviewed the teachings and complex passages of the Torah that I was so proud of, my mind was buzzing with robust arguments for the class I would teach. Today, more than ever, the truth must prevail, I murmured to myself, adjusting the sacred necklace I wore as a symbol of the tradition I carried. The distant sounds of the first steps of passers-by and the vehicles that began to circulate along the street made up a discrete symphony that, in some way, accentuated the solemnity of the moment. As I left the house, the cold, invigorating air of Philadelphia filled my lungs, and the city, with its streets full of stories and unusual encounters, seemed to conspire to make that day different from any that had come before. On the way to the synagogue where the class would be taught, I passed historic squares and facades, where time seemed to have marked each wall with memories of challenges and victories. The buzz of first greetings and quick conversations between acquaintances filled the atmosphere, giving the city an air of complicity and expectation. Arriving at the synagogue, I felt a palpable energy, as if each stone of that sacred building held the secrets of millennia. I greeted some colleagues and students, exchanging words of encouragement and reaffirming the importance of knowledge and faith. Today we will delve deeper into the coming of the Messiah and demonstrate the superiority of our tradition, I declared with conviction, as my eyes shone with the certainty that this was just another day of transmitting the truth. However, little did I know that at that exact moment, unknown forces were already preparing to change the course of my existence. As I walked through the silent halls of the synagogue, my mind was buzzing with the teachings that I had so zealously studied and taught for years. I remembered the words of my masters, the moments spent among sacred texts, and I felt an almost palpable pride for carrying the legacy of generations in my chest. In each line of the Torah, I found the strength that sustained me and the certainty that divine truth was manifested in each commandment. During the preparations that day, as I reviewed the comments of the ancients and the heated debates that marked my education, I could not help but feel an unshakable conviction. The wisdom of the Torah is eternal, I murmured to myself, my voice firm and full of emotion, recalling each teaching with the fervor of a devoted disciple. That sense of belonging and pride, however, was not just an intellectual exercise. It was a passion that pulsed in my blood. I remember an intimate conversation with Lysandra, my wife, who had always been proud of the dedication I showed. She whispered tenderly, as she held my hands in the dead of night, "You illuminate the lives of so many with your knowledge, Ezekiel. May the light of truth never go out in your heart." His words were a balm, and at the same time a silent reminder of the destiny I had chosen. As I prepared for class, adjusted my robes, and mentally reviewed the points I would vehemently defend, I felt a mixture of determination and awe. When I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw not just a man, but a messenger of tradition, destined to perpetuate ancestral knowledge. Every gesture, every rehearsed word, was a tribute to the inheritance entrusted to me. With firm steps and my gaze fixed on the horizon, I knew that the mission of that day was to reaffirm the supremacy of what I have always considered sacred. This preparation, full of fervor and self-confidence, was the ultimate expression of my pride, a conviction that drove me to face any criticism and to support, above all, the truth that I had always carried in my soul. As I delivered my arguments, with my usual conviction, The room was filled with an almost palpable energy, as if my every word echoed not only on the walls of the synagogue, but also somewhere deep within me. In the midst of the fervor of the explanation, I felt a sudden and intense pressure in my chest, something that could not be ignored. At first, I thought it was just a mild discomfort, a sign that perhaps I was overdoing the energy of the moment, but the pain quickly intensified, turning into a crushing sensation that spread across my ribs and threatened to paralyze every fiber of my being. As I continued to speak, the voice of one of my students, David, who had always demonstrated curiosity and respect, broke the uneasy silence. "Rabbi, are you okay?" His concern reverberated in the eyes of those present, but I tried to ignore the internal alarm, insisting on continuing with my presentation. Yet every word became a monumental effort. I felt my legs weaken, and for a brief moment my vision began to blur, as if a fog settled around the words I was so hard to articulate. "Continue, continue." I heard my own voice trying to convince myself that I could overcome the discomfort, while inside me the anguish took shape, insisting on becoming the protagonist of that moment. Suddenly, the room seemed to dissolve into a whirlwind of muffled sounds and anxious faces. With each second, the pain intensified, and the words I insisted on uttering turned into mere whispers. It was then that, in the midst of this internal struggle, I felt as if an immense void opened up inside me and my consciousness began to move away. In an instant of total surrender, I realized that my body, previously firm and present, was becoming inert. The last thing I heard before I completely lost consciousness was the worried echo of the voices of those present, and the whisper of, "Rabbi, hold on tight," which mingled with the distant sound of hurried footsteps. As darkness thickened around me, consciousness seemed to float in a space where time and space fell apart. I felt detached, as if my spirit was finally free from the shackles of my physical body. From above, everything seemed distant. Lysandra's anxious faces, Chase's frantic running, and the murmurs of those present turned into muffled, almost unreal, sounds. I was outside, watching myself from a privileged position, as if I were watching a film in which I was the protagonist, but without being able to interfere. In this state, every detail took on a new dimension. The expressions of concern turned into vivid pictures, and I heard the whispers of prayers and pleas for help with a clarity that had previously escaped me. "Ezekiel, keep the faith," echoed an internal voice, perhaps a remnant of the teachings that always guided my steps. However, the predominant sensation was one of deafening silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic beat of my own heart, now distant and almost imperceptible. As I wandered on this threshold, I tried to understand what was happening. There were no longer any physical barriers. I floated in a space where time mixed with eternity. In the midst of this trip, I noticed the presence of an energy that seemed to call me, a force that pulled me towards a luminous point on the horizon of this ethereal world. Each movement was smooth and at the same time loaded with a meaning that I still couldn't decipher. At that moment, the memory of Lysandra's voice, full of love and despair, resonated within me. "Ezekiel, come back to us." This plea, however, was mixed with an inexplicable feeling that something bigger was about to reveal itself. I was no longer simply out of my body, but entering a new chapter of existence where my understanding of my beliefs and my mission was about to radically transform. As my consciousness wandered in that space between life and death, a strange feeling of detachment completely enveloped me. I saw myself separate from the chaos occurring in the body, a silent observer of every detail unfolding below. It was as if I were in a parallel universe, where time dragged on in a slow, almost imperceptible melody, allowing me to perceive every whisper, every gesture, as if I were watching an intimate film of my own existence. I heard with distressing clarity the screams and calls for help that mixed with distant noises, but at the same time, everything seemed so remote, as if it belonged to another life. In this kind of trance, Lysandra's image remained vivid, her eyes wide, her voice trembling and full of fear, begging for my return. "Ezekiel, come back to us," she repeated, each word an anchor that tried to pull my soul back into my body. I could feel her desperation like an echo vibrating in the space, but the feeling of detachment was too powerful, as if something was deliberately keeping me away from that physical bond. At the same time, the figure of Chase, the paramedic, was drawn with an almost surreal clarity. He moved with urgency and precision, his eyes fixed on a goal I couldn't fully understand. Amid this spectacle of disconnected images, an inner voice, perhaps the sound of an ancient wisdom, murmured to me, inviting me to understand that on that threshold, I was witnessing something beyond the reach of ordinary senses. The environment was filled with an unsettling calm, where every sensation, no matter how intense, was diluted into a kind of resigned acceptance. I saw and heard everything, but without the active participation of a living being, as if I were floating in limbo, without barriers or restraints. This vision, filled with emotional details and sounds that defied reason, left me with a bittersweet feeling of abandonment, and at the same time discovery. Each moment seemed to be a silent revelation, marking the beginning of a transformation that I could barely understand, but which was already insinuating itself as a promise of profound change. Suddenly, as I wandered into that borderless space, I felt an invisible force gently pull me away from the chaos I was witnessing. It was as if ethereal hands were leading me down a corridor of darkness, and every moment was permeated with a strange and comforting calm. The darkness, which until then dominated, began to dissipate, revealing an intense and radiant light that seemed to emerge from the very heart of the universe. When I was attracted by this clarity, I felt that my being expanded, absorbing the energy and sacredness that emanated from that luminous beam. In the midst of my perplexity, a soft but deep voice echoed across the vastness, like an invitation to leave fear behind and embrace the truth that was unfolding. "Ezekiel, follow the light." This presence whispered, and each word vibrated within me with an inexplicable certainty. As I advanced, the light became more and more enveloping, almost palpable, and its reflections danced around me as if each particle contained secrets of the divine. For moments I could almost hear laughter and songs that seemed to celebrate an eternity of hope. In one of those moments I remembered the words of an old master who had taught me to always seek the essence behind matter, and I felt a deep reconnection with something greater than myself. The path to redemption is not a solitary one, Ezekiel. It is a shared journey of love and compassion, the light seemed to say, infusing me with a peace that dispelled the remnants of pain and confusion. As this experience unfolded, I found myself torn between the reality I was leaving behind and the promise of a new existence where truth and grace intertwined. The feeling of being guided by divine hands filled me with a renewing energy, and for the first time, I felt that the pride and convictions that once defined me were small compared to the vastness of what was to come. Every movement, every pulse of light was a reminder that I was about to be reborn into a transformed reality. The figure began to form in the dim light, slowly taking on a shape I could never have imagined. Before me, Jesus emerged with eyes that shone with compassion and a serenity that disarmed any defense. For a brief moment, time seemed suspended, and I, still panting and confused, could barely understand that vision that so contradicted everything I had known. He spoke in a soft, powerful voice that reverberated directly into my soul. "Ezekiel, why do you seek the truth among dogmas and arguments when it reveals itself in love and compassion?" I tried to find words, but all I got was a shaky whisper. How can I abandon my entire life of teaching?" He smiled with a tenderness that seemed to dissolve all my fears. "The truth is not in the rigidity of traditions, but in the humility of welcoming the divine love that transcends all knowledge," he continued, as his presence approached and enveloped my being in an unprecedented sense of peace. Tears streamed silently down my face, mixing the pain of my years of pride with the liberation that was beginning to emerge in my heart. I felt my defenses crumble before that ethereal touch that undid the chains of my skepticism. "You have always been surrounded by wisdom, but you have neglected the essence that unites all things," he said, as if each word was a balm for my weary soul. The environment around us, once dominated by the chaos of pain, now vibrated with new energy, a silent symphony of renewal. In the midst of this communion, I realized that I was no longer just a rabbi, but a man undergoing profound transformation. Every gesture, every word of Jesus penetrated the corners of my existence, undoing old certainties and opening space for a truth that I had never dared to imagine. Suddenly, in the midst of this intense light and revelation, I felt a familiar force pulling me back into the world of the living. In a confused instant, I realized that the ethereal environment was beginning to fade, and a strange feeling of urgency came over me. Before I could fully comprehend, my body began to react. A rhythmic beat, the constant hum of monitors, and the distant sound of hurried voices invaded my consciousness. In a mix of relief and fear, I felt that I was returning, and the transition was abrupt. Opening my eyes in the blink of a second, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. The medical devices set a serene rhythm that contrasted with the inner turmoil I was experiencing. Next to me, Lysandra, with tears streaming down her face, held my hand with an intensity that mixed relief and despair. "Ezekiel, you're back," she whispered, her voice breaking, while the warmth of her touch comforted and at the same time hurt my soul with the memory of what was left behind. Chase, the paramedic, approached, looking at me with a mix of concern and relief. "You've been through a critical time, sir. We're glad to have you back," he said, as he carefully adjusted the monitors. I, however, was still immersed in the vivid memories of that transcendent encounter, with every word of Jesus echoing in my mind. I saw something I never imagined," I murmured, my voice hoarse with emotion, as I tried to reconcile the hospital reality with what had been experienced on that threshold. The atmosphere of the room, with its white lights and antiseptic smell, contrasted sharply with the sublime dimension he had experienced moments before. Every sound, every touch, resonated in an intensified way, as if time itself wanted to remind me of the fragility of existence. As the doctors talked in technical whispers about my condition, I found myself torn between gratitude for being alive and the restlessness of knowing that a profound transformation was underway. In the midst of this duality, a certainty was established. Life would never be the same, and I would forever carry the weight and beauty of what I had witnessed. The transformation I experienced didn't take long to manifest itself in a visceral way in my soul. As I returned to my life, each heartbeat seemed to whisper the message of that transcendent encounter. In the days that followed, the fragile line between what I had been and what I now became began to blur. In long, solitary conversations where silence mixed with prayer, I found myself reflecting on Jesus' words. "Ezekiel, the truth is an invitation to love and humility," echoed in my mind, as if every corner of my being vibrated with this new call. One evening, while walking through the quiet streets of Philadelphia, I stopped in front of a small chapel. Upon entering, I found a group of people gathered together, each carrying their own anxieties and hopes. I felt at that moment that the universe was conspiring for me to embrace this new mission. "I need to share what I saw, what I felt," I muttered to myself with a conviction that surprised me. As I ascended the improvised pulpit, my words were no longer filled with harsh arguments, but with a sincere and moving passion. "Salvation is not in the rigidity of the law, but in the grace that unites us and transcends all barriers," I declared, while the audience, initially skeptical, began to see a different light in my eyes. Among the curious faces, a young woman approached and whispered, "Your message touched me in a way I never imagined possible." This simple recognition lit a flame of hope within me, and with each new encounter, I discovered the strength of love and compassion that I had previously not allowed my pride to embrace. The community, although initially filled with doubts and even hostility, slowly began to transform, inspired by this message of redemption and renewal. My sermons became intense meetings, where the truth of the scriptures was intertwined with personal experience and unconditional love. In deep conversations with former friends and even with those who once considered me enemies, my new mission was consolidated: to be a beacon of light, a messenger of divine grace, even if that meant sacrificing the comfort of other people's approval. Every word, every gesture reaffirmed that life is, above all, an opportunity to be reborn and to love without reservation. From that day on, every moment turned into a silent lesson on love and redemption. My existence previously, marked by pride and the rigidity of traditions, now pulsed with the urgency of a new mission. As I walked through the streets of Philadelphia, I felt that the entire city had been transformed into a vast stage for the dissemination of this message. In every face, in every look, I saw a reflection of what I had learned in the bed of my own experience. In the lonely early mornings when the city fell asleep, I found refuge in my prayers, now filled with gratitude and a deep desire to share the unconditional love I had discovered. During one of these nights, while walking aimlessly, I found a group of people gathered in a small square, where hope still insisted on shining amidst the shadows of despair. I sat down between them and began to speak, with a trembling voice, but full of conviction. True salvation is not achieved through the severity of the law, but through the grace that surrounds us and transforms us. I saw with my own eyes that the path to redemption is followed by love, and not by pride. The words flowed from me as if they were a prayer, and with each sentence, the faces around me lit up with silent understanding, as if each soul there found in it a mirror of their own struggles. In intimate conversations, friends who previously viewed my transformation with skepticism began to regard me with a mixture of admiration and reverence. Even those who had condemned me as a traitor were slowly beginning to realize that what I carried was not just the memory of a supernatural encounter, but the seed of new hope for everyone. With each preaching, with each word spoken with an open heart, the message gained strength and spread like a gentle breeze in the midst of a desert of doubts. I knew that my journey would not be easy, that challenges and rejections would still be present, but the certainty that divine love was revealed in every gesture and every look drove me to continue. This transformation, this life mission, was now the essence that guided me, and I, with humility and renewed faith, gave myself body and soul to the task of spreading the light that had redeemed me. From the moment that supernatural experience left its indelible mark on my soul, each day became an opportunity to be reborn and to transform the very essence of existence. As I resumed my life, I realized that the old conviction, once immutable, was now dissolving in the face of a new truth, a truth that exuded unconditional love and universal compassion. During long solitary walks through the historic streets of Philadelphia, where the early morning cold mixed with the remnants of dreams and prayers, I began to dialogue with life itself. Salvation is not measured by the rigidity of laws, but by the warmth that pours into the hearts of those who dare to love, I said in a low voice, as if my words were silent prayers that were lost in the immensity of the city. In unexpected encounters, sitting in squares or during moments of conversation with strangers, I discovered that the transformation was contagious. A serene-looking lady, upon listening to me, commented, "Your faith now radiates a light that calms even the most troubled souls." These words stuck in my memory like whispers of redemption, encouraging me to move forward, even in the face of hostility from those who could not understand the scope of divine grace. Every preaching I gave took on the tone of a sincere testimony, where pride and arrogance were replaced by humility and a fervent desire to share the love that had been revealed to me. "It's not about abandoning the past, but about transcending its limitations," I said with a choked voice, while the listeners' eyes were filled with a timid but palpable hope. Little by little, I began to gather a small group of followers, souls thirsty for a truth that was not found in cold scriptures, but in the human warmth of compassion. This new mission, which flourished even in the midst of adversity and criticism, was more than a choice. It was the destiny entrusted to me. I understood that every word, every gesture, every tear shed was part of a great plan of redemption, where faith was rebuilt based on human fragility. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video. and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.